Welcome back to Mezcal Monday, the series finale, part 8 in our 4-part series. Thankfully, we're finally here at the end of our Monday Odyssey.
Most of
unless
us are.
unless a really good topic comes up, and then we might have to have like the straight to movie theaters remakes of the miniseries.
There you go.
I sent you. Yeah.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, we had a couple panelists who were pretty insistent last week that we have a wrap-up session. So we kind of want to get everybody's thoughts on what we've learned, what we've been enlightened to, and kind of what we're looking for going forward. Go ahead, Lou.
The key thing that I learned, Pat, and this is different than what we had discussed earlier, but the key thing that I learned is if you don't tell Michael Rubel a day before and then an hour before the webinar, he's just not going to show up. That I learned that, and I learned you have to send him a lighting kit because Michael doesn't understand lighting. So those are like my big takeaways from the whole series, and I'm hoping.
Unfortunately, I'll tell you guys, Lou, you got to have some empathy for Mr. Rubel trying to run a bar in the middle of a pandemic as the state shuts down county by county, hour by hour, and his bar is like mostly outdoors. So I don't think it's,
Yeah, because he's got the garage doors, it all counts as outdoors. I think
it was like
position with that.
It was like we're MASH and we killed off Colonel Potter before the end.
Well,
okay. As long as we can think of Rubel as Colonel Potter, I'm in. That's awesome. Beautiful. Like and I have all the sympathy in the world for Michael. I do.
His space is mostly outdoors, but also those of you that are not in Chicago may not know that it snowed this morning, so it's not an ideal time to have an outside bar right now.
No, and we're also in the city. We're also under limits where that is pretty. Although they have a food license, so they can have indoor seating.
No, Rubel has no food license.
Oh, then they are really stuck with having
unless tamale counts, but it doesn't.
It doesn't. No,
it's true. So I guess part of this, the wrap up, and we're interested. There are a number of folks that we're looking out there, certainly on the Zoom feed, that have been watching almost every one of this. So we're happy to entertain questions. Obviously, type them, as Pat always puts in, type them into the feed, and we'll feed them as we go along. But part of the reason we wanted to talk to everybody about this is just feelings of what we've learned and what we got out of this. Because I think just because this was kind of initially a little bit my idea, that I wanted to do this. And a lot of it stemmed from a trip that, as we've talked about, Monique and Michael and a bunch of botanists made to Michoacan and to Guadalajara in January.
That I was not invited on. I just want to point that out. I don't believe Pat was either. So
that is accurate.
That Pat and Lou unfortunately weren't with. But for me, always been heavily engaged. I enjoy tequila, enjoy mezcal, and I've always been heavily engaged on the pure 100% business side. And developing a little bit of a love for mezcal meant that I was very much in favor of going and taking this trip and visiting all these places. And it was really mind-blowing and eye-opening. Not just, this is an extension of what I got out of this, which is understanding of all the places that I've gone to. And, I've visited Cognac and Armagnac producers in France. I visited Grappa producers in Italy. I've visited whiskey distilleries in countries all over the planet in both hemispheres. And I visited tequila distilleries before, but they've always been a little bit, again, more industrial and a little bit bigger. And I guess I would estimate, after in my lifetime visiting somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 distilleries plus that have done various things, that the biggest thing that I've taken away from this that's been confirmed is just how close to the earth this is. Just how close to, how tied up in hundreds, if not 1,000-year-old tradition of people. I guess that was the big thing that we really was the inspiration for trying to get everybody together, from Lou, who has dedicated a great deal of his life this, to Monique and Pat and I, who are in the business on one end, to Michael Rubel, who's in the business following into passion on the other end. That was the big thing that I really wanted to explore, because
I think,
I
Brett,
was blown away seeing that.
Yeah, it's a good point, but it's as much as we consider things to be craft, which I kind of hate that word now because it doesn't really mean
Mhm.
anything in the US anymore. But let's say we're just talking artisanal distilleries. As much as we can try to define that in the US, what is small on the scale of Mezcal or Sotol or Raicilla or Bacanora production kind of then looks industrial. It actually looks really efficient, and it's a, can be a everyday or 24/7 operation. And so when you really dig in with some of these families, got the Vieiras behind you. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And it's really interesting too, because a lot of these producers started distilling for their local community. It was generations, handed down.
Jorge Perez.
Almost everybody that all of us work with. I mean, almost all mezcal producers and a lot of tequila producers. It was like you would have been the person in that town or that area, or whatever it is, that produced for weddings and funerals and quinceañeras and like other, special occasions. And when I first started going down to Oaxaca, I found the same thing. I mean, the very first mezcal distillery I ever visited was Tio Reyes, who's one of the Mezcal Vago family, and he's their very ancient, like clay pot producer. And I described it as stepping back in time. I mean, the drive was insane, out in the middle of nowhere and takes forever. And then, big long walk, and then you're kind of walking all over the property and everything is foraged and getting into it. But the techniques, as modern and as efficient as they've grown at some of these distilleries, we were just watching people come up from the woods with an old Coke bottle, an old liter bottle, and just how much can I buy this for to take home? And so there was a point in time when they were just kind of, that was secondary. You were just kind of supporting everybody around you. And then little by little, folks have come along and said, this is really beautiful. We see a market for it outside of these communities. And if you're amenable, then we'd like to be the people that get to help you tell those stories and get these spirits a little bit farther out there. And now it's just exploded. I mean, it's just crazy.
Well, that absolutely true, everything you said, except for the fact that Tio Ray isn't ancient, and I think that's just a mean thing to say about him. But
didn't he just die?
No,
that was the who
Aquilino, like the original.
Oh, okay.
As following, but to me the interesting thing is, you're right, it's exploding and people going down and finding these small producers and bringing their story to the larger world, and then they start to scale up, and sometimes they scale up in more industrial ways, and sometimes they find ways to scale up that still honors the traditions, but then there's still all. Like there's absolutely industrial mezcal, and I think it's one of the things I try to impress on people in every one of my sessions is, not all mezcal is made in this beautiful heritage way, and so you really have to do your homework if that's what you're looking for. But then there's still also, even in Oaxaca, there are these families who were doing things in this like super old heritage way that people don't visit, and their stuff isn't getting up here. And it's a reason to go to Mexico once the pandemic is over, is to see this in person and to taste stuff that nobody else has tasted. And that's, and we just talk about Oaxaca, and there's this whole country called Mexico where they're making these beautiful spirits.
And we covered that. I mean, that was one of the things I believe in week 2, week 3, certainly we covered, which is like the fight between the CRM regulation and what is artisanal, what is ancestral. I mean, that was a big thing we covered, and exactly that this is, the tradition comes from these guys, yet in some ways, that was a big learning, that in some ways this is being a little crunched down by a little crunched down by the government being driven by big producers trying to regulate what the little guys are doing from the tradition, and all the things you talk about, Lou.
And also, though, there also comes a point in time all over the country that, like, at what point in time, I mean, does everything need to be pillaged, or can people just make things in the way that they always have for the community that they live in?
Well,
right.
They can't.
Well, he said, and how does that exactly, and what kind of impact does that have on people's ability to continue to provide their continue to provide their community at the prices their community can afford when they're seeing a lot more money, relatively speaking, offered. So it can come to the United States and to Europe and to the other places that are really finally discovering Mezcal full bore.
Yeah, Lou, when you're talking to these folks, a lot of you, and you end up working with, like Ben and Anthony on a lot of expressions that are really new, like the Malbienne, the green tape range, something like that. Do you find that people will say, I'm going to hold back 20%, or I'm going to hold back the heads or the tails, the colas or the puntas, or I'm going to do a certain thing that's going to be just for this community still? Or are they just ramping up production because now there's a market for it?
Yes and no, right? This is always the answer is absolutely. Some of the producers, that's exactly what they're doing. Other producers are, okay, I really want to improve the quality of life for my grandchild. And so I'm going to bring in as much money as I can. I'm going to build a bigger house. I'm going to make sure that child gets the education that he or she deserves. So you see all of that stuff.
And incentive in some cases, it's incentive for family members to come back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sounded like a big one. We talked about that with, it was week 4, I think we talked about people, and I don't remember who was talking about some of these operations. Well, look and behind me, there's, behind me, that's Jorge Perez, who was, what Monique said, one of those elders in the village who sort of taught everybody in his village how to do things. On the other side is somebody who came back, Emilio Vieira, when his father was sick, and he came back before his father was sick, but then took over the operation. And a lot of people are reliant on him. And Emilio's 3rd generation.
I think it depends on which side, if it's his mother or his father's side, which side you look at. I think it goes back farther, but there's lots of examples with a lot of these companies of folks who moved to the United States to be able to make some amount of consistent income, and then have had better opportunities, safer opportunities to come back and support their family back on the ground in Mexico, which, what a beautiful thing. I mean,
which Emilio did, yeah.
Yeah, we see a lot of that.
What's if you guys had to narrow in on one thing that was kind of an eye opener for you throughout this whole series? I mean, you're all very experienced in this. And it might not have been even from the Mezcal. It could have been from one of the other, beautiful, Mexican spirits we talked about. But is there one thing that really stuck out to you? I kind of know what it is for me.
You start
then, Pat.
All right. I mean, for me, it was, especially when we talked to David and when we talked to Pedro, and those two, their passion for trying to make sure agave spirits can be a sustainable, life choice for the families that choose to be producers of them going forward, despite this monster of a monoculture that we've created, example behind me here in this blue agave field, and how kind of how bad we've screwed ourselves over finding this one efficient plant. And this one is perfect for what we need it to do. Let's grow the hell out of this and ignore everything else. And how it's really kind of screwed over a lot of acres of land and a lot of family farmers, and what that's done for the environment too. I mean, more importantly, and how you need obviously this isn't new. It's 2020. This isn't new that we need a variety in our ecosystems for them to thrive. But how much other animals may or may not be dependent on one of the few consistent, long-lived plants in this desert area. It was kind of eye-opening to me. And it's like one of those things where I'm by no means advocating don't drink 100% agave tequila. It's a beautiful beverage. It's just one of those things where going forward, how can we as a consumer or a retail buyer or a bar owner, try to support, when possible, we need to support decisions that support the betterment of, the ecosystems down there. I think was a big thing for me. And it's like, as much as we'd love to just, buy all of David's tequila, for example, and put it on the shelf at every store, there's not much of it. When we can get his tequila, we get, 18 bottles, and we have 43 stores. It's not going to go very far. But it's important that we can at least talk about it when we can and offer it to some people who are, more in the know with it. But that was something that really made me think a lot, talking to both of those two over those couple of months.
It sort of reminds me of the plot to The Good Place, right? Like, it's so hard to make any decision now. Like, I just want to drink tequila, and even which tequila right? It's sort of, I mean, the whole idea of the industrially farmed Blue Webers is sort of a metaphor for the bigger picture of how sustainable is everything that we're doing, and and how guilty are you if you don't diverge from that. And there's no easy
It's also
answer.
though with Weber
We're not
Blue
drinking to
Agave.
feel guilty.
No, but if you go back to the history of why Weber Blue Agave was chosen, and it was not because anybody wanted to create a monoculture or corner the market on the tequila. It was actually made to be efficient, to have to take less plants out of the ground that could grow more quickly and have the right sugars. Like, it was actually made, the decision was made for the right reasons.
Yeah.
But over time, the fact that there's been no flexibility and that's not allowed to change have created this monster.
Crowded out the culture. It crowded out the rest of the culture.
Yeah. And that's simply where, it seems like they got so, like, the obsession to adhere to the rule is, crowding out the need to be flexible with the rule. And,
interesting thing that Brett and I were able to see, and I don't think we're at liberty to say where, but we went to a nursery, an agave nursery, that a bunch of plants that had been wild, the bats had pollinated, and then the plants had just, like the seeds had landed and grown, and they were Blue Weber agave within 2 generations, 2 years, 2 generations. They were already showing signs that if you just leave them alone, turns out Mother Nature takes care of it. So they already started seeing, instead of just being that straight up Weber Blue Agave, they were going to deep greens, even yellow. The shape of the leaves started changing.
Wow.
The way that the thorns were growing on them started changing. And it was really cool with all these botanists. They walked us into this greenhouse and kind of, the only reason we were allowed to go is because of the botanists. And the botanists went in and would have said that they were not Weber Blue Agave. No one in that group would have said,
right, because it was all that because of the cross-pollination, because they said, listen, here's the distance that bats travel in a typical period of time as they're rambling along through different areas. That was fascinating. And there's nothing, it's healthier, right? I mean, the whole point is, if you allow it to happen, it's actually it's a way to not kill off. Eventually you can narrowly breed, just like you do with dogs or animals. Monique and I see it, and Pat and Monique and I see it all the time in Scotland, because the same thing happens in Scotland with barley strains, where they just get so narrowly bred down because they find something vital. They become very susceptible to not being able to naturally naturally sexually produce versus asexual production, which is a lot of what happens.
They become really susceptible to disease.
They become susceptible to disease and rot and stuff. But that's also like the Scotch whiskey industry is proactive in that, and that that gets changed up every 3 to 10 years, depending on the strain of barley.
It's constant. They're submitting strains of barley for efficiency's sake, and
they're developing dozens
and
dozens in farms and universities and stuff.
Well, so with the ones that we saw, the fear was that if like big industry saw what happened if you just let them go, naturally, that people would say, oh, they're going to clamp down even more, because the only people that are going to make the decision to let bats pollinate and like those natural kind of changes happen. I don't agree with it, Lou. I'm just saying that.
I'm not even, it's not a disagreement with the theory that that's what they would do. Like, absolutely agree 100%. But the point is, Blue Weber grows all over Mexico. For instance, like I see we got our pal Craig here as one of the attendees, and they've got a Blue Weber mezcal that they're producing at La Luna, and 25% of the plants used to make that mezcal are wild grown Blue Weber agave grown in Michoacan. You get outside of Jalisco and suddenly you see Blue Weber is just another agave varietal growing in the wild.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the fear within
everywhere but in the highlands of Jalisco, which is where it actually is most prominently grown
Right.
right
Yeah.
now.
How ironic. Yeah.
Right.
No, I agree with you, Pat. I probably that isn't so new to me because I'm very
Mhm.
blessed that I get to work with Pedro and David and travel with them and work with them all the time. I think Pedro's process, I think it's so amazing that he's one of those people that has chosen to start very homegrown. You know, his export of that range to the United States is fairly new and still very small. And he's very dedicated to keeping it not only the liquid, but the education, you know, very, very close to home at Mezante. Like, and you have to go there and kind of earn it. You know, you got to go there and sit across the bar and taste things. And I really like that. We were, Brett and I, we got to be part of also like a big, I don't know what you would call it, Brett, that big education that we did for all of the bartenders in Guadalajara.
Oh, that was really, that was, I mean, it was actually a lot more you and Michael Rubel because it was so directly related to on premise. But I guess what it says, that is actually something I took away from that trip that really meant something, because it is the culture of youth in Mexico are getting, it tells me that they're also getting a little bit back to the earth, you know, and they're very, these are kids, hip kids that are following world trends, and they can tell you as much of what's going on in the United States and Europe with bartending and mixology and cocktails and things like that as they can in their own culture. But they're
I think they
also
could
at the
tell you
same time
more. I think that was the
stepping
point,
right,
is that they could
but
tell you
they're
more
also
about what's going on here.
they're also stepping back, and I think the purpose of that was so they, I mean, I guess what we wanted to do there was reinforce that the world cares about the Mexican artisanship as much as
Mhm.
anything else, and them needing to get the message that the world cares about the artisanship of all these small producers.
Well,
as
also
much
that
as
we
anything
want
else.
them to be the stewards of the information, the
Yeah.
education, the heritage, the history of all of this, because it isn't really, it's not, the word isn't fair, but the fact that it's like, I would, as a white woman from Nebraska, be the person that is doing any level of education back in Mexico about a product from Mexico. And so we talked
Right.
to them about establishing not like a bartenders guild, but like establishing a guild of, these are young people that are going to be lifers in the industry, that are going out and they're visiting the distilleries and the palenques and the viñedas and the trapiches and everything. And that we would love, rather than for, you know, of course, like Lou, we're never going to stop going down there and getting this education ourselves, but that we would like to have a resource that is driven by these Mexican producers and bartenders to be able to say, oh, it's, you know, .edu. This is the source for the information. These are the people that are right there on the ground and have access to the most information. So we did a session with the Guadalajara, basically bartenders, I don't know what bartenders guild, but there must have been 80 people there. It was unbelievable.
It was
It was
packed.
so much fun and so interesting, and the interaction.
More, and you remember, and the two most important, there were 80 people there, and it was a bunch of bartenders that were there at 9 o'clock in the morning after shift.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was like
Right, so
half, and it was like half women. And
Yeah.
it was really, really fun. And I mean, really, Francisco Terrazas was with us, and Francisco had, I mean, a lot of beautiful things to say. But I think really the most moving was Michael was speaking about how he started a stereo simply to bring, you know, that knowledge, education, respect to these spirits. And we got to share like his menus and talk about what you get to charge for these cocktails in Chicago, and like, look how people are drinking these things, and look at how beautiful this bar is, you know, all that kind of stuff. It was amazing. It was really fun.
And now you're making me feel badly for mocking him for not being here, because that's what he's doing right now.
Oh, no,
right this minute.
don't. Yeah.
Mock away, sir.
Mock away. Yeah, that's fine. If he's not here to defend him, if he's not here to defend himself, it's a dog eat dog world.
There you go.
Mm.
You know, it's funny. The thing, like the big thing that I remember, and maybe just because it was the most recent session, but the big thing that I remember from all of these sessions was speaking about the malting of the corn. Right? Like, I know that's such an odd thing to, but I for some reason I've never. And of course, you can malt anything you can germinate, you can malt, but I never thought about malting corn. And the fact that they're
I'm a
doing
seed.
that.
Can you malt me?
Yeah, there you go. And with Yvonne Saldana last week, like it got my head thinking in a whole different way about about corn in Mexico and other ways to move that corn from Mexico. Have you ever asked anybody in Mexico about grits?
No,
Can't say I
No.
have.
Yeah, it's
but
Well,
funny.
that's
Like,
masa, right? I mean, that's
no, no,
kind of
grits is not matzah. No, that's a different thing. And every time I have a friend from Mexico who's up here and I make grits for them, they're blown away. It's like that scene in the Marilyn Monroe movie, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. I don't know, where she's
well,
a whole
Gentlemen
new.
Prefer Blondes was the
There you-
movie.
It's a whole new way to wear diamonds when she gets the tiara. And it's like that with the Mexicans here when I serve them grits when they come to visit. And it's like a whole new way to eat corn. And like it shocks me that there's all this information in all these different parts of the world about this one product. And in this case, just one product, but really can be applied to anything. And then you see how these different ideas come from different places and don't always make it back to the place where the thing came from. Did that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was, and I'm with you. Like but one of my big takeaways, or one of my big learning, and I think all of us would have to because we dove so deep into it. And I'm with you, Lou, for the same thing with a little bit, sort of the same angle, but a little different angle. Because one of the things that Yvonne Saldana talked about was the fact that that wasn't like distilling whiskey is very new to distilling is not new to Mexican culture. Distilling whiskey is very new to Mexican culture, and it was part of Europeans coming across. But the fact that they took a very traditional way of processing corn, the nixtamalization and then the malting, that they took a very specific way of processing for food, and in a way are trying to make it, it's like, okay, we've been, not that this distillation's been forced on us, but this distillation is new to us. But can we then do this distillation with something that is centuries old, when in reality, or 10 centuries old or more, when the distillation of that was a big mind-blowing thing that
and
people
it'd be
don't
so
always give
much
credit for.
fun, like either to host Yvonne, or I've always said this very often when we go to Scotland, I'll take Mezcal with me
Mhm.
because it's predates, distillation in Scotland or Ireland by a long time. And so I think it's so interesting. I like drinking new make spirit from single malt Scotch distilleries. I think like an Ardbeg new make is absolutely stunning and peaty and gorgeous and round and all these great
Mhm.
flavors. So we'll be somewhere at a distillery tasting new make off a Scotch still, and I'll pull out a really gorgeous bottle of mezcal, and they almost always like think it's really strong and it's really vegetal. Sometimes people think it's gin or they have no idea what it is. But keep in mind too, Scotland is not really into tequila or mezcal or agave at all
No.
just yet. Maybe not really outside of the bartending set. But then when you get into the story and you start showing them, look at these clay pot stills with this bamboo coming out of it. People are like, that's now, that's happening now in another place in the world, where this was handed down. And then you see it change. And then they go back and taste it. And oh wow, okay, now I get this, and now I understand this a little bit better. And
Mhm.
when given that story in that context, like people are just fascinated by it.
Did I
Yeah.
did I tell you either like when we were alone or during this series about the tasting that I did of agave spirits for the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society?
I don't think so.
I've not heard
Oh,
that.
I was invited by my dear friends to their wedding, and it was supposed to be in Mexico City. She's Mexican and he's Scottish, and supposed to be in Mexico City, but his family got nervous about traveling to Mexico, so they moved it like 3 months ahead of time to Scotland. I already had my tickets. I already had my. Sorry, I just got a text from Michael Rubel. Was asleep on my couch. Thought it was over.
You
Oh,
just
he's
texted me
working
the
so
same thing.
hard.
Come on,
And
buddy.
so they moved, but I already had my tickets to Mexico, so I was down there, and I was flying from Mexico City to Edinburgh for the wedding, and I can't leave Mexico without a lot of agave spirits.
Mhm.
So he arranged for me to do a tasting for the members of the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, which is, if you're not familiar with it and you love Scotch, you should be familiar with it. Um, just one of the collection of the most knowledgeable people I have ever met about fermentation and distillation. And so I did a tasting for 13 of these members, and their takeaway from it to a person was that you could take any one of the master distillers from Scotland and bring them to Mexico and give them 6 years, and they'd never be able to make these agave spirits in this beautiful way. But if you took any one of these mezcaleros from Mexico and brought them to Scotland, within 6 months, they'd be making amazing scotch because they really understood the fermentation and the distillation.
That's an interesting
100%.
Right? It makes you want to do a
I gotta
cultural
give that more
exchange
thought.
program. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta give that more thought too. Because
Well,
I'm
it's-
not
but it
totally
was-
sold that. the
I'm not.
Scotch
Yeah, I'm
distillers-
not willing to agree off the bat here.
It
Well,
wasn't
but
me.
it's the fight. I think the fight is whether or not it's like sort of nature nurture, right? Is a little bit of that. Is the person who's highly technically educated, can they adjust to very rudimentary equipment, or the people who just use very rudimentary equipment and do it by instinct, can they then adjust to doing it in a highly technical environment? I mean, I think that's the sort of that would be my takeaway for that, is who adjusts better.
You know, it's interesting. There's
Either way, we need to get a reality TV show a la Wife Swap going on, where they swap distillers between mezcal distilleries and like giant Diageo plants,
I
Well,
love
like
that.
you have,
and hilarity ensues. You know,
Well,
well,
it's
can you
also
imagine
interesting.
Jorge-
You see the Scots have to eat Hispanic food.
I mean, everybody would love that. There's no good Mexican food in Scotland. I mean, they would just have to switch to curry and fish and chips and things. But it's interesting too, because it's not like nothing true. The words, these are processes. These are generations old and lots of teaching in school. Like the words don't translate over exactly the same. Like for instance, one of the reasons why I love this industry so much and these topics in particular is because I'm always still learning. And I've had people who have not watched this in real time and asked questions, but they've gone back and watched it. And then they are emailing and calling me, telling me things I'm doing wrong. And that's fine. I love that. I didn't realize that actually fields of agave are referred to, the Spanish word is huerta, which actually means orchard. So these are not fields. We call them fields. They're definitely not like farms of agave. There are orchards of agave is actually the word. And so it's like every single time, somebody kind of, we have a conversation or somebody points it out to me, it'd be very fun to be the go-between in these conversations. I'd love that. I would like to facilitate this reality show.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is it the MacArthur Foundation or the Ford Foundation? One of the two actually does cultural exchanges. I wonder if they'd be in for that.
Well, I would guess the MacArthur Foundation almost certainly has to, on the side of the Genius Grants and everything else they're doing. I mean, one of the things they're encouraging is like, we're going to throw some money at people just opening their minds and exploring things because they had a good idea.
How do you
I mean,
know
that's
about
kind
this,
of in my burlap sack. No. I've never been, unfortunately, as much as I come up with, I think, are a whole series of fantastic ideas. Nobody's ever thrown money at me to explore them.
It might
Well,
be
I
because you keep
suppose-
talking about your burlap sack, Brett.
I suppose that, the time that I bought a couple pallets of vinegar was a little bit, that was not funded by the
We're
MacArthur
not going to get into that
Foundation.
today.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have time. We just don't have time.
Well, Brett, I mean, what did we cover? What everybody took away? I mean, my other question for everybody was kind of like what you're looking for, when you're choosing agave spirits going forward. And I think, to what I kind of took away, my answer is variety, of both a producer and style and of the agricultural type, And I think that's something now, we all love these agave spirits and we love drinking and tasting all kinds of them. So, I'm not just going to abandon tequila just because Blue Weber's are are this behemoth now. It's just that I think I ought to mix in some raicilla and mix in some mezcal from various, not just espadines, and
Well,
not
I think,
just,
Pat, what you and I probably need to do, you and Joe and I and anybody that we can affect, I mean, everybody sort of is going to leave here, or at least a few of us are going to leave here with a job. And, Lou's been doing it as just a passionate person and a not-for-profit. Monique has been doing it because she's able to touch people who are on the level to educate directly with consumers. We just need to do
That was
I
the
get in
touch.
trouble when I touch people.
Yeah,
like that,
that's
I tend to
creepy.
get in trouble.
That's why you have to.
Particularly in your burlap sack.
Yeah,
You're wearing
it's
a
more of
burlap
a.
sack. You got
But
your hands out. You're just scaring people, Brett.
I think that one of the takeaways, I mean, for Pat and I and Joe, and what we can do is how can we turn around in terms of what we do with Benny's, making it informed, because now, we can, and everybody who has listened to this with any period of time can now make a more informed, whether it's completely informed, not yet. If you continue to learn, it can be more completely, but we know how to now make a more informed decision if we were consumers. So how are we able to translate that information to our consumers when they're coming in, to make it to help them make the same decisions that we're learning how to make.
Yeah, I think a step in that direction is maybe as simple as, coming up with some kind of sustainability flagging on our channel markers, where people come in and see a price and a name and a brief review, and if there's some way to indicate there whether, this is sustainably, produced or something.
It's
But then
interesting, Pat.
someone has to act as the gatekeeper on sustainable, right? Because there's
Right.
unless there's an authoritative, nonpartisan, non-biased regulatory body, like who gets to say who is sustainable to what
Well, I mean,
degree?
there's now an additive free, and it's not
Mhm.
like by the CRT or anything, but there's now some additive free, which I think is also really
I think it's
important.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the sustainable bat friendly, that's an actual certification.
Mhm.
Not a lot of
At
those.
what point in time does the additive free? That's going to be an interesting fight, because we
Mhm.
kind of skirted around, because this was more for education and less about, more about education and less about attacking, and more about shining positive light on the artists rather than negative light. There, what is going to be the backlash for the people who don't want to be tarred guilt by association? How are they going to treat that movement, the people that are in fact adding up to that 1% legal amount stuff that
I
they're
wish we
allowed
were at
to
the
add?
point where people cared, but I don't
Yeah.
think we are.
Right. Well,
Sweetener,
there,
oak flavor,
Some cares,
right.
some don't care, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's always going to be that continuum. But I'll tell you,
Well, no, but I
when you're
think Monique's right. But what Monique's saying is it's not them caring. They care as long as it has an effect on sales. I think, Monique, I'm assuming you're talking about consumers.
I'm saying consumers, which will then eventually lead to get back to the brands because of a decrease in sales. But we're so far away from,
Right.
these are behemoths. I mean, they're,
Yeah.
we're talking about the people that are the 1 to 5% that care a lot about this, that are going to really pay attention and ask the
Right.
right questions.
But
and
it seems like a lot of agave spirits producers who aren't in sniffing distance of Mezcal brand want to control CRM. Right. I mean, that's a discussion that we had on the side in Mexico with David Suro, and, talking about the fact that CRM is being run at least partially by people who don't have any business interest in Mezcal outside of needing to have some level of control over the growth of Mezcal vis-a-vis how it affects the tequila business. Right. Which is a dirty sort of a little dirty undercurrent probably about CRM that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah. But when I hear, sorry, I'm going to jump back to I think 15 minutes ago, because Pat, you were using the word sustainable, and I took a great trip through Jalisco with Michael Rubel, who wasn't asleep on his couch at the time, and we were led by Esteban Morales, who has a couple of brands that are in your stores, La Venenosa and Del Rombas.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and what he says, and I thought it was brilliant. What he says is, don't think about the word sustainable, because none of this is sustainable. Really, none of it's sustainable. Think about best practices and talk about the things that you do that are positive, as opposed to is everything that I do positive? I don't know how you track that. I don't.
Yeah.
This is an interesting. I had this conversation with Joe at your place because he asked me to help him figure out what's sustainable, and he starts talking about how much you're paying the workers, who are making harvesting the agave, and my question to him was, okay, well, how much are you paying that person behind the counter at Benny's? Like these are
Mhm.
like, and what does that even mean in the context of, living in rural Mexico versus Chicago? I don't know how you do that, but talking about, we do, like, bat friendly is a great example, right? We let X percentage of our plants go to seed in order to sustain the bats and sustain the diversity of the culture.
Which I love that one because that's
Yeah.
something, and there's scientists studying it and people do have to certify it and it's difficult. And there's
Yeah.
some big companies that can do it. There's some small companies, I mean, more small companies that can do it. And then there are people this year, I know there's a question out there just kind of like about the future of things, but there are people this year that cannot afford. In years past, they've been able to be bat friendly and allow that 10% to go to seed. And this year they're saying, I simply can't do it because we were closed and I've got all these people to provide for. So, my tequila last year might've been bat friendly, but this year it will not be able to be bat friendly. And so it also, I actually kind of like that. I get it. We're in a pandemic. I think they should have the flexibility, to make those decisions. I think too, it makes me think about when I don't eat or drink something that's like, for every time you drink this, like 10 trees are planted, so it's like, if we're harvesting agave, wild agave, we're foraging agave, we're going to plant 10, plants for every time that we do this. Like, I think that would be helpful to have more information like that available at the store shelf level, but I don't know how you do that with any consistency, but I think it would be nice to see.
Well, one of the things that you guys do a lot of, if I'm following your blog properly, is you have conversations with individual brands for whiskey and beer and wine on a pretty consistent basis. If you wanted to do this in a smaller, like, here's a brand and here's a brand, like presenting individual brands and talking about that, like I'm in. I got nothing to do on Mondays. I don't have a couch like Michael has.
Me and Lou are just going to continue every Monday. Just Lou and I are going to talk out here.
I'm in for that. I'm in for that. We'll get a deck of cards. We'll play.
It's also during a pandemic. Like, I have a hard time kind of bookending my day. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, so now I'm on, like, I was working by 6 a.m. So this, I'm like, oh, this is work. Would still work, but I'm at the end of the day. So it's
Bob says he's in too.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah.
I am
Well,
in.
And this really evolved. I'm glad you said that, Lou. It was sorry, I'm watching. In full disclosure, Monique, there's a very, very close friend of ours who is spending a layover on his way home from Scotland in town, and he just texted a joke and it popped up on my screen. I laughed at it anyway.
You should have to share the joke. You can't just say that and not share.
There's no way that joke's appropriate. I know who this man is.
I'm the only one who's not getting the joke. At least send it to me.
No. It's like not a funny joke. He's not like telling us a joke. He just made like a statement.
He made it smart. And so anyway, I mean, I'm really glad actually that you said that this is kind of one of the things I wanted for this to happen. And the only downside is, that this is going to live on Facebook Live and people will be able to watch it. And I think a lot of people have looked at it. Was this really turned into the conversation we wanted to have, Lou? And that's part of the reason why we started talking to you, or why I started after I sort of brainstormed the idea with Pat and Monique and then Michael and with you as well, because I think these kind of conversations are good. I think people have a little bit more time now for these, and there's very little fortunate about the pandemic, but one of the things that it has allowed is for people to explore different ways to use time because they can't be out and about.
Not even like they need something to engage with.
Yeah.
Hey, let's answer Daniel's question here. So Daniel Morel has asked, we see the craft beer market changing pretty rapidly and consumer taste changing. Holy shit, yes, we do. Breweries are making, now we're dry hopping beers with breakfast cereal. Breweries are making totally different beers from 10 years ago, if you can even call them beer anymore. Sorry, this is my...
Pat's historically a beer guy.
Injected into his question. Sorry, Daniel. Do you see any trend/changes in the agave spirits market / consumer tastes?
I mean, I think it's interesting that even the big boys, we're even seeing Patron go back to like not, now they've got a distillery that's a bit more artisanal. You see these places that have classically been industrial, paying attention to that teeny tiny 1%, saying it's important to take care of the land. It's important to pay the people the proper amount, and at least a bit for show. they're doing the right thing in some cases and going back and being able to talk about it. So I think we're going to continue to see that. I think that's going to be really important, especially I think with some of the, I don't know about all the celebrity brands, but I would say with something like The Rock, like you've got a platform, you've got people that feel like they have access to you and can ask questions about things. Like, I feel like they're going to have to be a little bit more on top of, I don't know, production methods and sustainability for what it's worth.
That almost feels like it contradicts exactly what you said 3 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Where the world is full of all these different people doing all these different things. And I absolutely agree. Like, there is a hardcore audience that's going to ask a lot of questions. And then there's a broader audience that's like, you know what? I want to get my kids to school, and I can't get them to school, right? Because there's no school. But I need to take care of my kids. I need to take care of work. I need to feed myself. I need to take care of my dog who just came to see me. There's all these things we have to do. And really, at the end of the day, I just want my margarita. And I think both of those things are very, very true. And it's hard for companies to figure out, okay, who is my market? Am I trying to sell to all these people? And I think that
yeah, no, Pat, because I think what you hope is just like people shifting towards organic food and making better choices. It's certainly not everybody, but people trying to make better choices about the veg that they buy, about the meat that they buy. Maybe at some point in time, people, yes, they just want to have their margarita. But I think maybe what Monique's getting at is what we want to get is if we can shift 20% of those people to give a shit about 2% to give a shit about the sustainability, and get the people that are involved purely as a business opportunity, like The Rock, to talk a little bit about some of the culture rather than,
I mean, technology has constricted all of this, so it's like they can go back and say, now people do care about that in wine. Now people do care about where their meat comes from.
Some do.
But that 2%, that's exactly right.
But the 2% that you're talking about is really going to be like 50% for that small market. So I was in the craft beer industry in 2002, working at Rogue Ales back when the industry was 5% of the market, and people couldn't imagine where it would be today. It's like, if you just keep growing at that small pace, you eventually get somewhere. You can't overstate the pace. That's all.
I was going to say, I think a notable consumer trend that has hit Agave, we just brought up, Monique just brought this up, and that's the additive free thing. And I think that's a positive change in the business. And that's, and that's driven purely by consumer demand and consumer interest. If there wasn't this current health craze and low calorie consciousness that we see, whether it has driven beer producers to make hard seltzer, or offer low-cal options or lower alcohol spirits or alcohol-free, quote unquote, spirits that we see, that more health conscious, natural movement. And I think that's, the simple fact of that there is a certification that exists at all for additive-free tequila exists only because of that consumer trend. So I think
it's interesting though, because just like organic wine or green or a lot of these kind of, sustainable, these kind of these terms that are kind of gray, a lot of these producers have always been that way. They just suddenly realized, oh, that's important to someone, so I should word it right. I should put it on the label that way.
Brett hears me say this to so many whiskey producers we talk about. Whenever we're sitting with a whiskey producer and tasting something, I always ask if it's non-chill filtered, and if they say yes, my first thing I tell them is, well, you should really put that on the label. And they're like, well, we don't think it's that important. I said, it's the first thing customers ask us now. It's the first thing any serious whiskey customer asks me. Therefore, I think you're only doing yourself a disservice if you're doing that and not putting it on the label.
Should start putting that on all the agave spirits.
Yeah. Well, it was like when Keystone
spirits.
It goes back to, and remember the old Keystone beer commercials, where it's like the bottle taste in a can because we have this special liner. All they did was they point out that they have a liner that the FDA requires every single can of beer or anything with alcohol. All they did was they talked about the liner that they are legally required to have inside that can, right?
But they were the first. They were the first to do it.
They were the first to advertise it. Yeah.
And it casts suspicion on every other brand.
Yep.
It's
100%.
But that's also
Genius.
like gluten-free. You know, it's like, do we need to be non-chill filtered gluten-free on every bottle of agave spirits? No, that seems
Well-
very
Well,
silly.
I think it's good that they
Celiac.org,
finally came out and kind of settled the
yeah.
gluten-free thing with distillates, whenever that was last week or the week
Last week,
before.
well, I mean, we've
Oh,
all known it forever.
The
except
last
that
couple of months. But they've
yeah.
said as long as it's distilled to a certain point. I mean,
Yeah.
celiac.org is amongst the organization
Yeah.
just said, listen, the fact
true.
is that as long as there aren't additives, that the glutinous protein is distilled out once it hits a certain level of alcohol.
Yeah, unless you happen to be making pachuga and you throw weed in there, and then you're just screwed. But that's a different story.
Weed or wheat?
Well, the weed isn't
I'd
glutinous,
say I
but
didn't know there was anything. Right.
Yeah.
but the wheat would be. So if you do a wheat pachuga, like it's going to take me out for a day, maybe two, depending on how much wheat is in
Sounds
there.
But that means
Yeah,
that
I mean,
they're
that's something that, pachugas do have, local grains in them often. And so if it hasn't been, and we were talking if it's just hanging in a vapor basket or something, I don't know. How do they normally add grains to a pachuga?
Well, there's no normally, right? There are different ways, and sometimes it's hanging, and sometimes they just drop everything into
Like
the
gin.
yeah. There's all the different processes.
So one of the things that I want to talk about, because it's maybe our last session, maybe not, who knows, Pat, just keep doing this to annoy you, is that at some point in time, everybody that's ever listened to this or listens to this in the future has got to go to Mexico, has actually got to get there,
Amen.
not be intimidated by it, get down there and actually support the local economies, visit these amazing people, these bars, these programs, these producers that we've been talking about. And it is like, especially Oaxaca, I know, Lou, I mean, we've gotten to go to a lot of places. We've been really blessed, but especially like Oaxaca City, there could be nothing less intimidating, safer
Right.
than
Yeah,
going to Oaxaca City, Mexico.
I think it's important to point out that I speak 120 words of Spanish. And in fact, because I've been unable to travel to Mexico in the last 7 months, I'm probably down to about 80 words of Spanish.
And it's
And you
mostly cerveza.
well, it's mostly destilado de agave, but
Yeah.
habla
Food, booze, and how to
mezcal.
find a bathroom.
Yeah, but you're right, and I think it's a vital part of the conversation is you don't have to speak Spanish to travel through Mexico, and in particular Oaxaca or Mexico City. You will find, as long as you're friendly, you're going to find a way to get through there.
I mean, Oaxaca
Well, and
City
fine.
is so beautiful. It's so fun. You can just wander. I've been by myself and felt very, I mean, my Spanish is good, but that being said, I mean, you will find, amazing, unexpected food, and you'll find, Michelin starred restaurants. You will find great street food. You will find water, you will get, I just feel like there's a lot of misconceptions and there's a lot of like anxiety sometimes over thinking about taking trips like that. And it's amazing and everyone should do it.
The only rule, just don't eat anything that is raw, uncooked, off the anywhere, really. Even in the Michelin starred restaurants, I won't eat anything raw. No salads for me. If it's cooked, yeah, I'll have like onion and cilantro if it's raw, because it's a taco and you have to do that, or salsas. Like I'll do that, but anything else, just
Right.
don't do it and you'll be fine. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Brett.
and I think was what Monique and I think to lead on, and it kind of maybe basically a little bit what talking about going and Daniel's question, what's new? There's probably going to be an opportunity now that the mezcal has blossomed so much and it's really opened up people's mind to artisanally small produced. Here's everybody's opportunity to start exploring Sotol while it's still new, right? Because it's not nearly as mature. Two of the things we talked about Sharonda, we talked about Sotol, and Sotol is a place where you can do some exploring and digging and get in early and go to these places and see it and participate.
If that's the level of like adventuresome you are. But like if you're not, you're just like, I like tequila. I think I like mezcal. You should not be afraid to arrive with like no itinerary. Have a place to stay. Airbnb, I've done it a number of times, and you will find people that will drive you out. You can find
or stay at
tours,
Bibiana's.
tours. I mean, it's so much easier than people think it is. And like, if you want to fall in love, like you've got this thing that you like, you want to fall in love, you have to put yourself in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm doing
You know,
100%.
speaking of Sotal, I just got a text today from my friend Arik Torin, whose brand of Sotal is La Higuera. They're releasing it's a Sotal, but it's not a Sotal because it doesn't come from the right region. But it's made from Sotal in Miahuatlan, Oaxaca. Like there's all of this, you're not wrong, Brett. Like there's all this amazing stuff that's starting to come out all over Mexico using this plant that nobody really talks about.
Yeah.
Beautiful
Well,
spirits.
Lou, and I don't remember was it. Salmiana from San Luis Potosi. Was somebody that was through a couple of weeks ago. What was that, Lou?
So it's a line of, I don't think they're going to be certified as mezcals, but a line of agave spirits that my friend Darian is bringing in from San Luis Potosi, and it's just this beautiful line of handmade spirits from a state that you just don't see a lot of mezcal coming out of.
Yeah, they were tased.
Right, and it was Salmiano, right?
Yeah, they were all.
Yeah, it's all Salmiana agave, but
right. But and we talk about
mezcal.
Salmiana usually, even the mezcal geeks, we talk about Salmiana like it's one thing. Like Karwinski. Sorry, I'm going into the weeds here, but Karwinski to us, oh well, that's this and that and the other. Like there's all these different kinds of Karwinski, but when we talk about Salmiana, it's one thing. But in fact, it's just like Karwinski. There are different kinds of Salmiana. And they taste different, and they taste, oh my God, everything that they served me, I'm assuming you got the same line, was beautiful,
yes.
Including the version that you had, the one with the cactus pear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pear. It was all it was the face off, including the one of the ones where the sort of the donut, the woman in charge and her son had a face off. Over who made what, and she's kind of in charge of the plenque or whatever they refer to their
taberna or benata.
Taberna, yeah. So but then he was learning the craft, and they had parallel releases based on this is what she does traditionally. This is what his riff of it. You know, things like that where you can sort of explore. You know, that's another thing, and there is some tourism in that area. And one of the things they talked about was how important it was to that area and how friendly people were for the ability to come into that village and find these plenques and to start to understand a little bit of the beauty of the land, but two, the beauty of the culture.
So, amen.
Yeah, that's awesome. See, I feel like I want to go back and I want to watch the other ones, and then I want to pick things out to fight with you guys about.
I'm in for a fight, Monique.
I feel like we've been up for a fight this whole time. I feel like we need like Ruble back on to fight.
This is the thing. We were in for a fight, and Ruble, he just backed out. He just went to his couch like a lazy ass and ran away from the fight like a little boy.
Right. You know those kids that like you were going to meet them after school for the fight, and then they never showed up for the fight? That's Ruble.
That's Ruble.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, because we've been, and this is something as we're probably getting a little bit closer to wrapping up. This is something, so we will be taking a hiatus. How about we just say we'll be taking a hiatus for a period of time. There have been a number of people on all sides of the business of agave who have contacted me directly, who have been watching this. From producers all the way from producers of.
So we get to assault them with questions from 6 people.
I'd like to bring some consumers. I'd like to have some general consumers.
I want to get the Rock on here, damn it.
Yes, I'll reach out.
I can work on it.
I can smell what he's cooking.
I think that there are a lot. I think that there is still a lot to cover, and I think that maybe what we should tell everybody who's stuck with us both are a really great core group of people who have watched all 8 of these podcasts or of these sessions, as well as the significantly larger group of people who have eventually watched this on Facebook Live, that maybe we do this again, we take a little bit of a break and we start to get some topical things and sort of keep your eye on this space.
Eventually, I want to look at food pairings. I want to look at cocktails, which we always thought we were going to engage Michael, with a little bit more, but like serves and cocktails. And then I want to get in fights about stuff. We've dug in deep enough. We're week 8 of 4.
I want all of that, but I also want to talk about individual brands in depth, to talk about, like, this is exactly what you're hitting on here, Pat, is what are you doing that should make people want, obviously, do you taste delicious? And then what else are you doing that should make people want to purchase your brand? I'm in for that.
Brett and I have a lot of, a lot of brands contacting us all the time for these things, and we tend to be pretty hard line in that bring us your distiller or your owner. Otherwise, we're not going to deal with it.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see where this goes. I will say, we don't have a lot booked in November and December currently as far as virtual tastings go. We have some.
So
we'll see where that goes.
Sorry. Just an idea. Could we even like tape some of these rather than doing them live, tape some where we can have conversations with the people who both own the brand and make the spirit, but don't speak English, and have an interpreter, and then edit it out so that in the end, people can just hear the conversation, and then we do a Q&A afterwards live, maybe?
Well, that's
maybe
a podcast.
sounds a bit obtuse, but if you're, for people interested in that kind of conversation, I highly recommend checking out Barrel to Bottle, the Binny podcast, co-hosted by yours truly. We've been putting out episodes of that every single week now for almost 2 years. And we have a lot of really interesting things. We had, for example, we just recorded one last Friday with the founder of an Australian whiskey distillery, so things like that.
I wonder,
if you're interested
Lou,
in geeky conversation, it's something to check out.
Well, I wonder too, because Pedro from Mesante, he's been doing Wednesday conversations with his distillers, from these like very, very far off places. And we could probably work to even do like subtitles on something, which I think would be really interesting. So maybe we could do.
I wonder if Zoom has a functionality already or something.
Oh, and we never talked about
my wife is a
Pajarote. We never
Spanish
talked about
speaker and can act as translator or something.
We never talked about Pajarote either. Speaking of Pedro.
Yeah, I know. We should talk about that's a beautiful project. I think too, just breaking down like different stills and their effects on things like the different still materials and different maceration materials. And there's like all these things that I could talk about forever. I mean, this topic is absolutely
fascinating. Conversation for sure.
Yeah. I mean, not to include a shameless plug here at the end, but we've got like 24 episodes of Agave Road Trip already. I think that's a lot.
Yes.
We've got like 12 episodes of Agave Road. We've got like 18 episodes. I don't know how many episodes we've done of Agave Road Trip, but a podcast and it seems never ending, the subjects that we want to talk about. So yeah, and that's the beauty of a system that's non-industrial. It's pre-industrial. Is there are so many little facets to it that you can't stop talking about it.
We're not at the end of this, but I still, have to really thank Pat and Brett for always hosting us on this, Lou, and Michael, if you were here, and all of our producers and our partners, because it tells you that you've got a retailer, a store, a group, in Michael Binstein and all of Binny's that is interested in this level of education, that you have people in the aisles, that you have people, even during COVID, not quite so much, but that you're willing to put this education out there and ask the hard questions. And there is somebody in the store that can help you. So like, if you are a native here, like get to the store and ask questions, because they're super educated. Pat's been leading spirits education for a long time. Brett did it before that. Like, it's really, your program is really sophisticated. And I think that's very, very unique in the industry, especially for an organization of your size. And I appreciate you guys so much for it.
Well, and we're allowed to go off the ranch a little bit too, because as you notice by this podcast or by these sessions, that we're not, we try to be very careful to be friendly to our partners, but we are never required to, we're never required to say anything we don't really believe in. And it's one of the nice things that I think you can anticipate. As Monique said, that when you talk to people in our stores, I think you can, and we don't demand. Pat does the education program that we have finally formalized over the last 1.5 to 2 years. And it is to point out to them that we will never, ever tell somebody to go out and shove something down somebody's throat that you aren't behind. We don't want bad mouthing going on, but we're also not forcing people to sell you something that they don't.
No employee at Binny's is forced to sell anything. When you talk to a person in aisle at Binny's, they're talking about what they like and what they know. And if they don't know it, they're going to get you somebody who does. So
even if it's say lacto fermented pickles in a rye barrel up at the checkout counter, they're not going to push it on you.
We have your cell phone number posted at each register just for that situation. Perfect. You got to call this guy Lou if you want to know about this.
Right.
Pickle project.
Well, guys, it's been fun. Everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. Hopefully hopefully you thought about what you learned and what your next agave spirits purchase might be. You know.
And then for contact too, I mean, if you have any questions, if you have any topics or subject ideas, one venue you can email us here at spirits@binnies.com. Lou, you're lou@sacredagave.org.
That is correct. And if anybody wants to talk about a chocolate bar that's filled with caramel made from pulque, send me an email.
Lou's got a lot of
There
chocolate
is
bars.
I've got 1,000 chocolate bars, and I'm
We're
going to eat them all if you
discussing
don't buy them.
the possibility of those being available at Binny's sometime in the near future, but that will be a sidebar conversation.
Yes.
And in the meantime, I guess we'll have, keep an eye on this space, because we're
Yep.
going to take a little bit of a break and accumulate.
Taking a break from agave, but on Wednesday morning, actually, Brett and I are going to be on with the master distiller from Highland Park, my favorite single malt Scotch distillery of all time. We just did a beautiful cask of whiskey from them. We're going to be
Yes,
talking
you
about
did.
that. And
At a
think
robust 10 a.m. if everybody's not doing anything. at
11
10
a.m.
because
11 a.m. I was
apparently
wrong earlier.
11 a.m. because apparently this particular distiller is the only person in the Scotch business that can't stay up until midnight like everybody
Yes.
else.
And
And,
then
and
the
Highland
following
Park is just
Wednesday,
made
actually,
up
we have
north of Chicago?
what's that?
Highland Park, it's just made north
So
of
beautiful,
Chicago?
Lou.
Yeah.
Yes.
No. The Orkney Islands. And then the next Wednesday, actually, I think it's November 4th. Brett and I will be on with the newly anointed master distiller at Jack Daniel's. So taking over for.
Yeah, that's exciting.
I forget the guy's name too already.
He's new.
Jack.
He's so new.
But he's,
It's Joe
Yeah.
Daniels.
Well,
We're
he
gonna have
was
a few
Jeff.
things
He
going
was Jeff Arnett's apprentice and assistant for a number of years, so well qualified.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks again for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you around again for all things nerdy spirits conversation. Check out our podcasts and we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Bob. We'll see you
Appreciate you
Wednesday.
having me on.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.
See you guys. Cheers.
Bye.